This week, we're going to discuss the terms rhetoric and composition, which are both pretty key ideas to this class. I'll also introduce some terminology about rhetorical situation that will follow us all semester. It will be the first thing you see every time you have a reading assignment, so please take some notes on these terms. I like to start with composition, since that's the word we tend to be more familiar with. The verb compose is used to mean to write or create, especially a work of art, or to write or phrase a letter or piece of writing with care and thought. I like these definitions and the synonyms create, originate, invent because they remind us that composing can be a very artistic and thoughtful process. When we talk about composition in the context of a rhetoric and composition course, we usually use this word to mean writing. But that doesn't mean it's not related to those fun words about creativity, originality, and inventing. That's an important reminder that writing is not just about scribbling a pen across paper or stringing words together. It's about intention and purpose and creativity. We're also going to talk about writing as a social process of meaning making. What this means is that we think about writing as something that is always already social. We learn language as a social process as children and as we grow. We gather ideas from reading and watching and listening, from engaging with other people. We put together these ideas in order to express ourselves to others. That means that part of composing is thinking about the world around us, who influenced our thinking and what means of expression, who we want to influence, and the best ways to do that, which brings us to rhetoric. I'm starting with a definition from Patricia Bizzell and Bruce Hertzberg, who are current scholars in rhetoric and composition. They define rhetoric as having a number of overlapping meanings, and end here by noting that rhetoric is a complex discipline with a long history. It is less helpful, they say, to try to define it once and for all than to look at the many different definitions it has accumulated over the years and to attempt to understand how each arose and how each still inhabits and shapes the field. And so now I want to take us through some definitions of rhetoric that will take us back in time over 2,000 years to ancient Greece. Aristotle defined rhetoric as an ability to see the available means of persuasion. And we'll see this word a lot when we talk about rhetoric, because when we're writing to an audience, a lot of what we want is to convince them of our point of view. Quintilian was an ancient Roman philosopher and rhetorician who defined rhetoric as the art of speaking well, because, of course, back then, in this time period, we're more concerned with speaking than with writing. Cicero brings in the word eloquence and the rules of art. We're still concerned with speaking and persuasion, but we can see the links to composing here. We're jumping forward in time to the modern world with Friedrich Nietzsche, who says that rhetoric is the essence of language. So, what I want you to take from this idea is that some people would say that we can't use language without thinking about rhetoric, about persuasion, about speaking well and being eloquent, and generally considering the effect on our audience. To use language without these things is to be a robot. Charles Bazerman is a current rhetorician who says rhetoric is the study of how people use language and other symbols to realize human goals and carry out human activities, ultimately a practical study offering people great control over their symbolic activity. I like this one a lot because it suggests that when we're talking about rhetoric, we're talking about more than just speaking or writing. We're talking about lots of different choices we make every day. Kevin DeLuca, another current rhetorician, defines rhetoric as the mobilization of signs for the articulation of identities, ideologies, consciousnesses, communities, publics, and cultures. And I like this definition a lot because it's a good reminder that a lot of the ways we identify ourselves and our communities are about this rhetorical question of how others see us and how we want to be seen. Sonia Foss defined rhetoric as any kind of human symbol use that functions in any realm, public, private, and anything in between. And I love this definition too. And it's something that's going to be the basis of how we talk about rhetoric in this class. That anytime we're communicating anything in any way, that's a rhetorical process. So here's how we're going to try to bring this together into something that's still complex and encompassing huge complexities of thought, but simultaneously deceptively simple. To study rhetoric is to study how we, as authors, rhetors, can most effectively use words and symbols, and understanding the use of symbols around us. So my example is that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is an example of a rhetorician. He used words very effectively as an expert to make his points and persuade others. And his work is also a common subject of rhetorical study as we examine how he made his points. One of the ways that we most frequently analyze a text is by talking about three key rhetorical terms: pathos, ethos, and logos. I find that most students have encountered these terms at some point in high school. Logos comes from the Greek root for reason and is also known as a logical appeal, where we are using logic and reason to make a point. Ethos comes from the Greek root for disposition, and we use it when we're talking about the way a person has credibility. Remember back to the way Aristotle told us that's what's persuasive is a good man speaking well. Pathos comes from the Greek root for suffering and taps into an audience's compassion, anger, or other emotional response. Understanding the way these elements function in a text can be really helpful. We want to make good logical points. We want to develop good credibility. We want to engage people's emotions in a way that makes them engaged and what we have to say. But rhetoric is a lot bigger than these aspects. When we talk about rhetoric, we're talking about potentially everything. If we're analyzing what someone has said or done, or if we're trying to be effective in the way that we present our own words and actions, there's a lot we have to consider. We might look at a whole range of choices, and we might take extra care to consider the choices we make and the effects those choices will have on an audience. Things like word choices. How can we change our language to really reach people? Clothing choices. What does it mean to dress professionally? Zoom or PowerPoint backgrounds. Editing and correctness. What is conveyed by typos and errors on our resume? Tone, formal or casual. Body language. One thing to consider is the way you sit at your desk in class sends a message to your instructor. I've learned that someone who is sitting in the back, kind of slouching down, might be paying attention, but the signal being sent is different whether that's fair or not. On some level, when we talk about being rhetorically effective, using language and symbols to make our points, we're having to pull back and think about all of these things. One of the ways we'll consistently discuss rhetoric this semester is through discussing rhetorical situation, which we can understand as getting an understanding of the range of specific circumstances that impact the choices and meanings of a particular text. Note here, when I use the word text, I'm most frequently referring to an essay or piece of writing, but it can refer to any product produced by a human using symbols, like a video, an advertisement, or a meme. Anything that a human made using symbols to achieve some goal. This slide shows a diagram representing the key parts of rhetorical situation. By understanding these elements of a text, we can have a deeper understanding of the text. This includes the author, that is who wrote it, the audience, who they're writing to and how we can tell, the purpose, why they wrote it, what effect they wanted to achieve, the subject, the topics and ideas of the text, and the context, what we know about the world or situation around the text. In this case, you're looking at a text that is a slideshow called What is Rhetoric and Composition by Dr. Wright. So that's our text and our author. The audience is you. I don't know you yet, but I made this for an audience of students starting rhetoric and composition, so I've made assumptions about what I need to define and clarify. The purpose is to be informative. The subject is defining rhetoric and composition. The context is that it's the start of the semester. We could get more specific about the specific semester or the modality of our class, which play a factor in how I prepare to give a similar version of this text each semester. So now that we've started talking about these terms, let's apply them to looking at a couple of specific texts. First, here's an advertisement that was everywhere a few years ago. Who is the author? Who is the audience and how can you tell? What is the subject? What is the purpose? What do we know about the context that might help to give us more understanding? Hopefully, you can tell pretty easily that the author is Nike or a group of people working for Nike. We'd probably consider the audience for most Nike ads to be the general public, but I think the subject and context of this ad make it clear that it's targeted more towards Americans, and specifically Americans who are part of or sympathetic to the movement for Black Lives. The subject is Colin Kaepernick, and the idea that he represents placing values over personal success. And the purpose, well, it's an ad, right? So the purpose is to get you to buy Nike products. But as I've already suggested, the context is really important to understanding how we would identify the audience and how we'd react to this advertisement. This was done in 2018. In talking about the context of this ad, I'd talk about Colin Kaepernick's decision to kneel. I'd talk about the wider social and political reasons that he made that choice and the ramifications to his career. Since this ad is a few years old, I could also talk about some of the ways the ad was received and how Colin Kaepernick's message might be received differently today versus how it was 6 years ago. If I wasn't sure about any of this stuff, I would have to Google it. For a second example, I've picked a meme from this summer because I think memes are a good way to talk about the importance of context. Sometimes talking about context can feel like stating an obvious thing that you already know, but sometimes it means having to stop and Google something you don't know. In general, though, it always means having to look outside the text in question. Take a second and think again about this question of rhetorical situation. Who is the author? Who is the audience? What is the subject? What is the purpose? What context do we need? That is, what knowledge do we need to bring to this in order for it to make sense? This meme did have an original author, but it was cut off by the time I saw it, so I don't actually know. The audience for this is probably going to be defined by the cross section of people who understand the references here. The purpose of most memes is to entertain and maybe just be clever, right? Maybe we could look at some other ideas of purpose depending on what the meme is, but I think that's a fair place to start. The subject of this is about Barbenheimer, but memes are all about context. Part of what makes them enjoyable is that we see so many iterations of the same thing based on some movie or show or game that we already know, used to comment on other media or politics or something else we care about. In this case, we have to begin with Barbenheimer in the summer of 2023, what the excitement was, and the fact that there were a lot of jokes like this one. Then we have to recognize the movie still from Legally Blonde, including what was going on in this specific scene. So, what I'd like you to try to take away from this is a general idea that talking about rhetoric is talking about how authors make choices and make meaning. And I'd like you to take away the parts of the rhetorical situation, this framework that we'll use to analyze choices and meaning of the text, author, audience, purpose, subject, and context. These ideas will follow us all semester as we write. In this class, we'll be working on writing and improving our writing and learning from other writing of others. And we'll be thinking about how that writing fits into a larger social context. That is, we'll be thinking about writing rhetorically. In particular, we'll be focusing our reading and writing on the topic of education and learning. Through the semester, we'll read lots of texts that deal with aspects of the education system and how we learn. And I hope that you'll find an area in this big topic that will really interest you to write about. Some topics that past students have written about include how to handle procrastination, experiences in HISD and Aldine schools, analysis of family beliefs about education, how Lone Star College could better reach out to parents who speak primarily languages other than English, mental health among college students, how meditation impacts learning and student success, how Lone Star College could better help students facing food insecurity or homelessness, how Lone Star College can support LGBTQ plus students. There's a lot of room to pick a topic that speaks to your particular interests, whatever they might be, whether it's something that's very personal or something that gets more broadly political. There's room for finding that space in a project in this class, and so I hope that you will find something in this big topic that will really interest you and that you will enjoy reading and writing about in this coming semester.